of Racial and Gender Equity. So excited to be here with all of you today. This presentation is from 8 p.m. until 9 p.m. It is our last one of this day of Extra Give. So first and foremost, thank you for everybody who has given. Thank you for everyone who is here to learn and grow along the journey. Yeah, we can give a clap for everybody. I will check the leaderboard towards the end of this session to give an update before we close out for the night with our mission live, just to give an update about all of our donors and our current amount. So please continue to donate and enjoy this session as well. Right now, I have Stephen Sharp with me, and I also have Adam Hosey, and I'm going to ask both of them to introduce themselves. Stephen?
Yeah, hey, I'm Steve Sharp. I am a school counselor in Lancaster County and department coordinator. I'm also the president of the Pennsylvania School Counselors Association. In addition to that, I'm a published author for school counselors and have a best-selling book and travel nationally and internationally talking about race and education, technology, and mental health. So I'm really happy to be here today.
My name is Adam Hosey. I'm an abolitionist educator in Harrisburg School District. I teach English, Black history, and feminist history. Prior to Harrisburg, I was in Chester County in a predominantly white school district. And before that, I was in a cyber school. So I've been in all kinds of educational spaces and happy to be here. Thanks, Jasmine. Oh, and I'm also the training coordinator at the Center for Racial and Gender Equity. And that's a really great thing. And that's why I'm here tonight.
Yes. Thank you both. So I do want to say that among all of our sessions that we had today, questions have touched on this idea of equity and education in some sort. So these questions will bring everything home for us. And I know that among the two of you, I'm going to refer to you as the experts in the Zoom. But I just want to let you know that it is something that is relevant right now. Not only today, but also when we are contacted here with YWCA Lancaster. So that is something that I wanted to address. My first question, and I'm gonna let this be free flowing. So if you feel like you wanna jump in, I feel like there is only the two of you on, please feel free to jump in to respond. Why are we having this conversation? Like, why are we at this point that we need to have this conversation about equity in education, anti-racism in education?
I mean, more Black bodies keep dying. So I think for yourself and Stephen and I, it's incredibly frustrating to have someone die in order for like a little bit of progress to be made. So even if you go back to like thinking about like Mamie Till had to publish the pictures of Emmett in order for the country to care. So like that's why we're talking about this right now, and it's cool that we're talking about it, but I always just have to hold that frustration that it is taking death for us to actually have that conversation. But I'm glad we're having it, but we are having it because we are so much better at seeing these inequalities that exist. And social media does a lot of bad things, but one of the good things it does is it disseminates good information sometimes to a lot more people, and it makes it a lot more accessible. So I think a lot more people can have this conversation, and we can kind of build a little movement here.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the reasons I had to echo what Adam's saying. I mean, like, why are we having it? I mean, like, the reality is we've been having conversations as far as like anti-racist education for years now. I remember even in 2015, 2016, partnering with the YWCA of Lancaster with Nick Myron at that time to really see if we could really infuse more anti-racist conversations into our schools then. And the reality is, like, it took a captured attention of, I think, our nation sitting at home for 2.5 months to start realizing that this dissonance that I was feeling was reality. Like, and absolutely, like, that disparity, we should take pause and we should be enraged by Black bodies. But at the same point, like, the reality is for the 2.5 months before that, or the 150 years before that in our state of education, the disparities in education were more present now more than ever. I mean, the reality is you could just hop in your car, mask up, and drive 5 miles in either direction. You see two different education systems taking place. So I think, why are we having this conversation? We've continued to have this conversation, but hopefully now we can really start doing meaningful work, though.
Thank you both. I have another question, and that is, what are the key principles of anti-racist or anti-oppressive practice? So what are those key principles?
Time out. I'm so excited to hear Adam's answer. I've always wanted to engage in conversations with Adam. Like, we like circle around each other. So yeah, I'm here for this. So let's do
That
it.
just means Steve doesn't know his answer yet.
Oh, I got it. I'm ready. Yeah.
So for me, from the teacher end, it is really critiquing the way you have been socialized in your own learning and how that shows up in your creation of curriculum, in your classroom environment, in your discipline practices. So it is a constant reflection in how your practices either reinforce that white capitalist heteropatriarchy or work to dismantle it. And that's kind of the short answer. I'm sure we'll get to a longer answer later in this hour, but that's kind of the short answer there.
Yeah, I mean, like, Adam's key word there is dismantle. I mean, I always fall back, and I think my biggest model is Odd Lord, and the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So for everything that we understand are the structures and contours of racism and oppression, then we just need to look to the opposite. So we know that racism is monolithic. It's a single structure going to singular points, giving power to singular people. Possibly, if I was to put a number to it, sometimes less than 1%. But then if we take a transition to that in a different way, we understand, like, anti-racist practice, they're going to be prolific. We're going to take the lived experiences and shared voices of our families, of our communities, of our students, and we're going to lift those up. And again, a lot of the practices and norms, when we talk about like oppression and systems of oppression, like, those are implied, they're socialized, as Adam has said before. And so here we need to make it explicit. We need to make it clear with clear language and terms. We need to use data to then identify when there is disparity and ask real questions as far as why that is. In the same way, again, like, where I think racism and systems of oppression, they thrive on power and fear. Like, here, then, anti-racist principles say we're going to be fearless, we're going to be supportive of each other, and we're going to find real joy and liberation in the work.
Thank you both. So I love what you both just said, and I want us to dig deeper, because I'm sure that there are people that are listening right now that heard the words reinforcement and dismantle and are wondering what is being reinforced and what exactly do we need to dismantle. So can you please just give us some examples of things that are being reinforced right now and things that need to be dismantled?
Ooh, I'm so excited.
So I teach English, and when I came into Harrisburg, let's just say we have 3 white kids in our building, and everyone else are BIPOC students. The curriculum I was handed, I was supposed to teach Romeo and Juliet, To Kill a Mockingbird, and like Beowulf. So
Let's get
those, yeah, right? Like, those are books that are written by white authors. And when we continue to show our students that only white people are worthy of creating works that are worthy of being in schools, it shows our Black and brown students that perhaps why even bother writing, because it's only white people that we're seeing in our buildings. So I made a very distinct point to not read any white people in any of my classes. We read one, and it's Matthew Desmond on his writing about redlining. So that's just one example. So when we only look at works by white males very often, and we hold those up as like the great works, that reinforces the system, and ways to dismantle it is to show Black and brown students that there is a broad variety of what can be considered art and what can be considered beautiful, and for students to see themselves that they too can be beautiful and create beautiful things. that is something that can be liberatory.
Adam, I'm 40, but like, can I become a student at your school? I'd like to sit in one of the seats, if that's all right. I do have
Yeah,
a
man. We're online. Just I'll give you the Zoom link.
not a Zoom bomber, I promise. I'm here for the literature. Like when we talk about like these multi-systemic interactions, like the one thing that we can talk about as far as the way it looks and just the expression of it, let's go to economics. The World Economics Forum is the leading body when it comes to understanding global markets. It's where heads of state go. It's where, you know, you'll see LeBron or like Brad Pitt drop in there sometimes. And like they come for gain leading economic information. And they have this thing, it's called the Global Risk Index. It's meant to sound like it is, like end of the world, doomsday kind of stuff. And since 2017, it's been clear what has been at the top of the Global Risk Index. It has not been viral infection. It has not been global warming or nuclear warfare. It's been inequality. And we understand the contours of inequality have been sewn into the nature of our country from the beginning. And when we talk about that, particularly when it comes to Black and brown people, particularly enslaved people, like we understand, like slavery was not just a system of working without economic restitution. It was not. It was a system of unequal enforcement of the law. It was systematized sexualization. It was violence. It was unequal access to healthcare, real estate, education. And when we saw the end of slavery and the rise of Reconstruction, like what we saw happen was very clear. Like it ended forced labor, kind of, without economic restitution. And everything else kind of stayed. Like it really was a copy and paste from slave codes and replacing with the word Black codes. And this was both in the North and the South. And so we need to really take like dramatic pause when we talk about like systems of oppression for understanding that there are a few different things. Systems, and these are multiple and dense and complex systems, and they can be oppressive. When we talk about oppressive, it can be, again, with violence that we've talked about. Again, there are Black bodies on the street from people who are representing our state. And then in addition to that, really a lack of structured opportunity for our students. And that could be as simple as, again, my school might have laptops for you, and your school, you don't even have food right now. And so when we start really understanding the impacts of these multiple systems of inequality, we should take some concern and also look at all of our systems with a high degree of scrutiny.
And historically, Steve bringing up enslavement and the institution of slavery, education was used to keep people down, and it continues it to be used to keep certain people in their place.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll be here saying right now on to all the viewers, I have been a racist. I am a racist. I have perpetuated systems of oppression through education and in other ways. And I think it's truly recognizing that we're in this constant tension between oppression and liberation, between anti-racist and anti-oppression principles, or perpetuating them, that's the real challenge here. And it's in that constant struggle of self-exploration and in addition to that of critical analysis of the system simultaneously that we can really do the work. And I'm so here for having those conversations with Adam right now. I feel like it's house party and we're doing like the kid and play dance together right now. Except I'm clearly not the one with hair.
So one of the things that I was going to touch on was how schools perpetuate this cycle of oppression. But I think I want to jump into, since we touched on that, I want to really talk about how does segregation still exist in schools, and what are the effects of this?
Yeah, I mean, the best illustration of this is a colored law. Well, no, I'm actually gonna scratch that. I'm going to colored law back. We can circle back to it. Really, one of the best illustrations as far as what segregation looks like in the 21st century in Pennsylvania. Research for Action, which is an educational think tank out in Philadelphia, they really did a comprehensive analysis. It was very similar to ProPublica educational analysis called Miseducation, which I would actually challenge your viewers to look at, and maybe I can pull up the link in a few seconds and drop it in. Here you're able to see like a few different things. You can see the difference between as far as what school segregation would manifest. It seems like when it comes to years of experience by teachers, access to honors level or AP courses, school counselor ratios so that we can provide students with education as far as careers and post-secondary readiness, or school counselor ratios where a student who is having a mental health crisis may be responded by a highly trained mental health professional versus a law enforcement officer who didn't have any certification criteria until 2019. These are going to be real things that we're going to have to really question as far as what kind of services are we delivering to our students? And as Adam said so eloquently before, what is the goal of education in that circumstance? And so then we see these constant tensions being built around as far as how we are delivering education and what those end goals are.
Adam, did you have any response for that as well? How does segregation still exist in schools?
I do, and all you have to do is in Pennsylvania, which is correct me, Steve, it's either the worst or like the bottom 5 most segregated.
48th out of 50.
There you go. As far as it's the worst segregated system in the country, because all you have to do is look at a map of our school districts. So, did you give me share settings yet? So if you look at Dauphin County, you will see very meticulously how Harrisburg School District, predominantly Black and Brown, and Steelton School District, predominantly Black and Brown, were carved out of other school districts. And if you dig into the history, most of those other surrounding school districts were created in the decade after Brown v. Board versus Education. So what you had larger school districts, then Brown v. Board hits, where we have to integrate the schools according to the Supreme Court. And then you have white flight, you have other school districts being created. And Steve mentioned redlining. In Pennsylvania, because of how weird our school districts are created, it's houses that create school segregation. And then we bring in the idea of property taxes being tied to our educational funding. So the richer neighborhoods will have richer schools. So all of that just brings up more of this gap between our richest and poorest students.
Yeah, and like just expanding upon that, we started doing some early preliminary research into this. And so if you actually go to like the state archives and look at some of the source materials of these conversations, one, we would take a few different notes. Like Brown versus Board of Education, as you noted before, was where we desegregated schools nationally. But it wasn't until the Green case in 1964 that we really saw a change and the enforcement of it. And at this time, we did see the rise here in Pennsylvania of most of our modern school districts at that point. And if you looked at the source material again, it would be either existing boundaries or community traditions would be the specific language they would use if there was a record at all. And that gives us a lot of concern. But it wasn't until 1974 that Pittsburgh public schools had to be forcibly desegregated. Again, that's like within my brother's lifetime, and we should all take pause as far as like how recent segregation was explicitly within the contours of our public education system.
And within a school district, like a larger school district, like Philadelphia School District, you will see magnet schools and charter schools being used to enforce de facto segregation. So you'll take a school like Masterman, which is one of the top, according to the statistics, one of the top schools in the nation. They have the highest population of white students. So there's segregation within districts in that way as well. This is an outstanding website.
Yeah, and it's a really great one. I think we're gonna try and share out, but it's bit.ly/miseducationpa. I will get you there to the website, or you can Google ProPublica and miseducation. But it's one of my favorite time passes because I'm a nerd.
Right. Am I on it right now, Steve?
Yes. Go ahead and type in whatever school district you want, Hempfield or Manheim Township. Those are both our school districts.
You can drill them down to individual buildings. So it can be, you can look at it. And when we talk about, again, as Adam had said before, one of the clear lines when we talk about opportunity for students is school climate. And ways that we can measure school climate are things like disciplinary practices. And here we're talking about discipline, or really the quality of education is how often we can have a student receiving high quality education from an educator, whether it be in person or virtual. But with that being said, like if there are exclusionary practices like suspensions and expulsions, or things like chronic absenteeism, these are really strong smoke signals as far as the culture or climate of the school. And we can see that students of color here in Pennsylvania are almost expelled, I believe, 5.6, so almost 6 times more than their white counterparts. That's very concerning. And then in addition to that, when we talk about, again, systems of oppression, system structures, uh, these systems are sometimes based off of things like money. And we understand that the funding formula for Pennsylvania is woefully broke. And so that's why there have been ongoing lawsuits again to re-examine this.
Great.
And just to circle back to it again, like for us to have these pointed conversations and really question the practices that are happening with these school entities, again, if you're a fish in the bowl, all you're going to see is the water and the pebbles. But it's only if we can take a step out of it and look at these large data sets, compare between districts, and then ask the hard questions, both from a historical standpoint and from a contextual standpoint, what is going well and what is not. Like the reality is, again, I believe strongly that there are educators out there that need to examine their racial bias. I think very strongly there are educators out there that are very well intended and have the best interests of students in mind, but we're all agents within the system until we can take an opportunity to see ourselves in the context of the system. When we talk about like the oppression cycle, like most people think about stereotypes or the messages that we hear, or in addition to that, prejudice, the thoughts that we think about people. And then they'll think about like discriminations, the actions we take about groups of people, and they'll think that is the breadth of it. But what we understand, what's best illustrated through Ibram Kendi's Stamp from the Beginning, is like we really need to look at these systems of oppression and how they really drive all the other systems in place. And if we can be intentional about seeing those systems, then we can really take actions to shift those systems for getting, frankly, more return on the investment. But just like trimming a tree, if we're really going to get at those systems, sometimes we need to lop off the branches of both discrimination and prejudice to make that lift a little bit easier as we uproot oppression.
Thank you. So both of you touched on discipline when you were just talking. And I want to really go further in that and ask you both, what is the school to prison pipeline? Does it still exist? Have we really figured this all out and there is no school to prison pipeline? And if there is, what does this mean for our students?
Yeah, jokingly, actually the school to prison pipeline currently might not exist as much as it used to. Just because we aren't suspending students or expelling students currently, because a lot of education is happening virtually. But the school to prison pipeline is what we know to be true, is that students who have more disciplinary infraction, including expulsion and suspension, are more likely to have contact with our legal system and more likely to be incarcerated later on in life. And we need to take real pause with that. We're responding with all these exclusionary practices or disciplinary practices or response by law enforcement individuals for things that really could be an educational or a mental health crisis. And are we having these types of practices balances by exploration practices to see if a student's having their needs actually met, and social supports to make sure, like, again, some of these Maslow'ian supports are actually in place to begin with. Like, is my student like really yelling at a teacher and being disrespectful and being suspended for that? Or I'm like being a bit facetious, but I'm not. Like, are they just hangry? And if we were to make sure that they had a steady food supply, would that actually make things better? So there are absolutely things that we need to look at, from like the ABAR framework. Again, when we're talking about stereotypes, messages, and discrimination, we need to make sure that our educators have strong teacher training to examine their own biases, have constructive conversations with themselves, and take a trauma-focused lens to ask our students, not what are you doing, but how can I help and how did we get here? And then at a separate time, we need to really take an examination as far as the exclusionary practices. And again, make sure that we're providing adequate and efficient support for our students, both educationally and social emotionally, and really explore some of those rules. Like, why are we suspending a student over a halter top, possibly?
Yeah, I see progressive discipline as being one of the most pervasive ways. So like what Steve was talking about, suspending a student over a halter top. will happen if a student creates a record. And then these little things will add up, and then suddenly they're getting kicked out of school for 3 days. That doesn't add up. That doesn't make any kind of sense. So we have no empathy in the way we discipline students. Teachers also use write-ups as a replacement for classroom management, and administrators just allow it. We also have these weird rules that are just straight out of prison, whether it's the way we gender our students and divide them based on in that gender binary, whether it's last year our building tried to have students walk down the right side of the hallway. So that was just like a very strange thing. We police, and we literally police them sometimes in what they wear, in the things that they wear on their head, in the language that they use, and we are completely ignoring, like Steve said, like kids are just kids. We don't let them have emotions. We don't address any kind of social emotional aspects. We don't try to understand their trauma. We just want to punish them to get them out of the classroom sometimes.
If my student Adam came in jorts or sweatpants today, I'm happy to see Adam today.
And I'm usually hangry.
Yeah, I'm also very happy to see Adam today.
But in talking about this, both of you know that there's a certain culture that comes with a certain culture and learning that comes with being able to handle situations like that. So what resources are available for incoming teachers, for people that are seasoned teachers, administrators? I want to even say anybody that has that hand that touch on a child, a student, what resources are available so that we don't keep perpetuating this cycle of oppression with our students?
I would say there are a few different ones. NAS, which is the National Association of School Psychologists, just put out a new guide as far as disciplinary practices, which really elevates things like, in addition to like restorative practices on top of that. So shout out to them. A huge shout out here in Pennsylvania to Patan or Patton, sorry, depends on which side of the river you're on, to Patton and their ongoing resources and training for educators when it comes to alternatives to discipline as well. Those have been great resources. I think there's also, I'm gonna just challenge, like, we understand special education is in and of itself a tool that can be used for opportunity and oppression as well. For our students with disability, really understanding special education law is something that I've used as a strong advocacy tool when it comes to disciplinary practices as well. But in addition to that, one of the biggest things that we can use as far as I think really quelling the school to prison pipeline, in addition to that, which is why I was so happy to have an opportunity to share like the miseducation and the research for action. Research is the data talks. And so taking out opportunities, this is where school counselors, this is core to our training and the work that we do to aggregate school discipline data and then disaggregate it and then have some of those difficult conversations with our colleagues on what's actually happening in the building, and then look to create different work, whether it be advocating for policy, individual students, or providing support and training when it comes to anti-bias work. These are some fundamental work that we can be doing.
I was hypnotized by Stephen. Can you repeat the question, Jasmine?
I thought it was better the first time when you were unmuted, but that was just me.
I believe now I have to go back because I was talking. It was dealing with the cycle of oppression, and I was talking about resources. What resources or tools are given to anybody that has a hand in these students' lives so that they don't perpetuate that cycle of oppression?
Sure. I would say for new teachers especially, finding your crew, finding the people that match those values, and learning from them. Being a new teacher is incredibly hard, but if we rework our framework and look at everything through an equity lens, rather than trying to apply equity at the end to everything, if you start with equity, that's going to make things a lot easier for you. When we think about what it means to be an abolitionist educator, Dr. Bettina Love, who kind of has coined this term and is the primary advocate for it, she talks about how you have to be subversive. Sometimes you cannot follow the rules to a T because we know those rules are oppressive. So I'm not saying go and get fired. But like if your building has a rule where like kids can't eat in a classroom for whatever stupid reason, but we know that like we can build connections with students if they have a safe space to eat. If we know that like a kid needs to wear certain clothes or doesn't have anything to wear aside from a hoodie and your building has a no hoodie policy, let that kid wear the hoodie, because all you're going to be doing is writing kids up all day. So it actually takes away from your teaching. So if you just focus on your teaching, all those other things will fall into place.
Yeah, I don't know. As an educator, for me, I feel very fulfilled in the work I'm doing. But a lesson I learned earlier on working just in the healthcare system was like, I, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to work with you and nurture you and support you. Like these are the goals for my education, what I aspire for.
So we touched on social workers and the role that they can play with the social emotional aspect. I also want to expand out because it's our day of extra give, and there's nonprofit organizations, 500, I believe, in 31, or yeah, there's a lot listed there all throughout Lancaster County, and I would say even in Pennsylvania, if we even spread out, that have programs that internally should be benefiting students. How should schools be partnering with these community organizations? And when I talk about partnering with community organizations, I don't mean specifically tapping into what is already existing. How do they go back to these community organizations and say, these are the gaps that we have right now? How can you help us fill it and challenge that system so that we can build equity?
Um,
Uh, One, I just have to say that we shouldn't need nonprofits. Like we should have government that provides for the needs of the people. So I think like this extra give thing is wonderful. It's people coming together and giving all kinds of money, great. But like we shouldn't have to have Water Street mission. But that being said, like that's what it is. I think building leaders really need to take the lead and reach out to the communities and make sure they know all the sources that they can use. So that does, it also doesn't put a lot of burden on the teachers, because fundamentally schools shape communities. They don't just shape students. So schools need to be in positions to help those community around it, especially in like tight knit communities like Lancaster City, Harrisburg, where there are larger populations. So I put that on the building leaders to understand where their sources are and to make sure they're bringing in people who can support their teachers.
I, like I definitely hear that. I'm just gonna respectfully disagree to a certain degree, just on like when I first started working with YWCA, I just finished talking in a Millersville grad class, and just a couple of grad students, Dana, Matt, and Madeline, they reached out and they wanted to talk more about the Eric Garner non-verdict, and like so we talked about it. We wanted to talk about race and education. And it seemed like there were some resources out there for adults, but nothing being directed at students. So that's how we started something which we called the Leadership Summit, which still runs to this day. It's an anti-racism network that we have students from all around the counties come together and have conversations as far as a large group training as far as anti-racism, and then unpack that a little bit more. We partnered with the YWCA as the first organization, Lancaster, back in 2015, and then replicated that in Dauphin County and in York County, so that we're serving Lancaster, Lebanon, Dauphin, Cumberland, Perry, and York counties at the end. 7 counties, over 1,000 students having these conversations as far as anti-oppression work. I'm not a building leader. I think some of the people at Run Point who have brought their students to these conversations, they've been subversive. They've been fearless, and I think we need to honor that part of it. The one part I would challenge to any educators listening to that is, again, if we're going to be doing anti-racist work, we can't wait for the system to work for us, and we need to be willing to step in and change the system, and hold that tension to the place where you still have employment, so they still have sway to change the system, but at the same point also be willing to take some of that risk. The reality is the Wright brothers had probably 1,000 crashes before they got 30 seconds of air, and so for the lives and futures of our students, I challenge us to be fearless as well. And that work, again, that was done by people who didn't even have an education degree, working for the students here in Lancaster County and beyond at that point. And again, I think some of those intentional partnerships, bringing in for either just building a relationship like we did with the YWCA Lancaster, having that expertise training like you're talking about, Adam, building cross-district partnerships with amazing educators like yourself. In addition to that, I do feel like this is how we build a counter system. Like we build that new narrative. And when we talk about, again, these systems of oppression that are around us, they've been designed. They've been designed either with intentionality or not, but leading to the same oppressive results. So it's here where we focus and turn our attention to rooted in equity, focus on the future of our students, that we're willing to create something different. And the reality is, it might be another system of oppression, but the only difference is we're going to still have that foundation in equity and be willing to change it, to scrap it, and to rebuild that model into something new. And I think that's something that's fundamentally different than systems of oppression.
Thank you. So you touched on YWCA, and I'm going to go back to Adam because he is one of our social justice trainers. You are a training coordinator. I want to know, with YWCA, how do we support anti-racist practices here in Lancaster and all across the county? I want to say the country because there's YWCAs all over. How do we support anti-racist practices?
Across the country, I'm trying to take this show on the road. So just saying. You're coming, Steve.
That's good. Shotgun.
I think not being part of a school district gives us a lot more freedom to name things as they are, a lot more freedom to gather data from across all of organizations. In this short summer that I've been gathering a lot of data, we've got almost 1,000 responses to the same 6 questions. So we can use that data, we can bring that to other organizations to build momentum. And we also can just see things from a variety of different viewpoints. Our social justice team has so many different kinds of people on it, not just thinking about race and gender diversity, just thinking about their backgrounds and thinking about their ages and experiences. So I think we're in a very unique spot to help the community. We also have like the biggest, most beautiful building in Lancaster City. So like the Marriott can go shove it. So I don't know.
So if you're speaking to specifically, Steve, I'm going to ask you, because you said we're only this, we're only like, we're not the top administrator, and I want to challenge that because you hold space.
Pick me. I got an answer. I got a response for it.
Yeah.
No, I own it. I want to own it, because if you think about it again, let's go back to the anti-racist model. In addition to that, like the education system by structure is clearly monolithic. All the school is represented by a single individual, your principal. And that goes to your assistant super, that goes to your super, that goes to your deputy secretary, that goes to your secretary of education, and so on and so forth. School boards, you matter too, and it's the same funneling system, though, respectfully. But like teacher leadership, like school counselor leadership, that can be prolific. That can be, again, something where we're taking the lived experiences of our parents, of our community members, of our students, and we capture that. We combine it with the system data that we have, like the data. We take it with our understanding of like what really student achievement can be, and we pluck all those pieces up like a bouquet, and we hand that back to our students. We hand that back to our school communities as something that can be a piece of the future. Like I think in the end, like the necessary to have co-conspirators, subversive leaders in the school is good, as Adam said, to find your squad, because again, this is going to be prolific leadership. This is going to be horizontal leadership, which again, we understand this is going to be the way that we create equity within our schools, through a network, not through a single pinpoint then at the end. So do I say, are we single individuals? Yes, but I think we're a mighty squad at the end. And I think that's something to be celebrated.
And I just want to add, you have to have your squad as teachers, as people that are lower down there on the rungs. Like if anything happened to Steve, he can call his people and we'd be out there getting his back, right? So when I was first trying to like be more actively anti-racist, I did not build a squad. So like that flag behind me in my virtual background, I had it hung in the classroom. My superintendent came through, told me to lower it because ironically, Pedro Rivera was coming to our building, right? So I said, no, I will not lower that gay pride flag. Boom, suspension. I did not have a squad, suspended for multiple days. And that's essentially why I'm in Harrisburg. But I didn't have a squad then. So now I've built a squad. I can be a little more subversive. I can be more actively anti-racist. So anyone listening out there, you got to have your crew.
And like, I know something that we were intentional when we created the Leadership Summit and why it's been able to sustain is we were intentional in building not just a vehicle for the students, but in the same way, constructing two parallel vehicles, one for the students and one for our facilitators. And I think that's something when we talk about the future work that the YWCA could do, because I know that was foundations of the work that we already did, was having a network of seasoned trainers that could come in to be co-support in that. And the work that I do, whether it be in educational leadership, whether it be in educational advocacy or anti-racist work, we look to have a training so that we're speaking the same language and we're working together in the same way, that we all understand the structures and systems of oppression and opportunity.
So we touched on a little bit about where do we go from here. And I want to introduce this, and I have another question after, but I just want to know, like, where do we go from here? I hear people always saying that they're starting committees. I know that the work has been actively being done because it's either on the news saying, hey, we're trying to fix our school to prison pipeline. We're really assessing the discipline rate, especially in our marginalized Black and Brown community. So what else needs to be done? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I know that particularly over the past few weeks, there's been so much tension in and around the election that they felt like that was the impetus for change. And just frankly, I think that the election was important, but I don't believe that in and of itself is the impetus for change. The reality is that there's been lots of dramatic changes that have happened and things have stayed the same or gotten worse regardless of the administration. I think where we go from here is there is clearly, like from February to June, the nature of like the anti-racist work has just so much changed. I feel like a lot of the work I've been doing over the past 2 years is just to sell people on the idea of anti-oppression practices and just to let them understand that the word anti-racist actually exists. I don't have to do that anymore. So like now we have to talk about what that really means from here. Like I think that we need to be very clear, like reading a book or being part of a dialogue group is insufficient. I think it's good, again, to lop the branches, to prune back the hedges so that you can get more to the roots of the matter. But when we start about getting to the roots of the matter, we need to dig deep, and that's action. What that action is again, understanding how policy and law works. What that action means is mobilizing and training people to work in unison together and recognize what injustice looks like. I think in addition to that, it's going to be, again, that constant cycle of self-reflection, again, continuing to challenge the system and the people that we put in power to the system to do the next right thing. Those are some of the things, and I got other conspiracy ideas too.
Yeah, everything Steve said, and then I would just add like putting pressure on policy. So I'm biased, obviously I'm a teacher, but I do believe that education is our best path for dismantling oppression. So we need to put pressure on all levels of our school districts. That's our local school boards, that's our curriculum, that's right down to our teacher education programs. We have so many of these state universities that have very good teacher education programs, but do not require any kind of critical race or gender or feminist theory classes. And then they're just sending, 96% white teachers into the world every year that don't understand race relations or what it means to actually be anti-racist in practice.
We're working on a thing. Talk to me later.
If you want to touch on that, feel free to, because my question was going to say, like, we know that for this anti-racist education, for it to really work, we need more diverse teachers, but we also need them to be trained to do the work. We just don't want to put people in places just to put them there for representation, or I know the word trophy is used a lot. Steve, you don't have to give us the whole rundown, but
Well, I can talk very clearly about this one thing. I'm the president of the Pennsylvania School Counselors Association, and something that not that I did, that the association did, is we rewrote the foundations of our organization. Our organization works by ends policy, which means we have big goals and we'll put all of our effort and resources and talent towards those big goals. And clearly equity was one that we put in over the past year. And I'm not just talking about like equity, diversity, inclusion. I'm saying anti-oppression practices in our training, our resource development, and in our self-monitoring is fundamentally one of the ways that the Pennsylvania School Counselors Association has taken lead at this point. I'm here very clearly saying, and I can say it because I've said directly to the associations, I'm challenging every other Pennsylvania State Association of Education to join us in that mission. I'm here very clearly saying, because I've said to the other state school counselor associations, I'm challenging you to be part of that mission. I can say, as someone who introduced the bill or introduced the policy but didn't vote on it, the policy passed unanimously. I can say here that one of our counselors said it very clearly. I'm looking at the language of this policy and it makes me uncomfortable. I think this is the right policy for us to move forward as an association. These are educators. These are educators from all the corners of our state right now, in the most rural schools, suburban schools, affluent schools, and the schools in need in addition to that. And we are clear, if we were going to create the education system our children deserve, we need to start really embracing, central to it, equity. And equity is not just talking about the values of equity, it's doing the work.
If we want more BIPOC teachers, we need to give our BIPOC students better experiences, because there's no way a kid who doesn't have a good experience in school is ever going to be a teacher. And the other thing with that is we also need to support the teachers that do exist in our districts. We need to have affinity groups for BIPOC teachers. We need to understand the cultural proficiency of what it means to be a Black and brown teacher, not just student, but also our teachers.
Shout out to like PSBA and the work they've been doing. They put out a model equity policy for school board associations to adopt, for school districts to have central to it an anti-oppressive equity policy. And the reason I want to bring this back to like when it comes to diversifying our teacher workforce or educator workforce, saying school counselors, principals, that's definitely part of that conversation as well. Like, regardless of the makeup of your faculty and staff and school board right now, to embrace something like an equity policy, to do the audit, to be honest with it, to be self-reflective, and then to do the work, I strongly feel like if you embrace that and tell that story, that's going to be one of the best recruitment tools to bring highly motivated, highly talented individuals of all colors to your district to make real changes in the lives of all your students.
The idea is change policy, then change minds, because we do not have the time to change the minds of everyone in a school district. But if we can change the policy, that's something.
I'm okay with 51% moving forward and then working on the rest afterwards.
Yep.
this is great conversation. And I'm going to invite either one of you. Stephen, you seem like you want to pick Adam's brain a little bit. Adam, you seem like you might want to ask Stephen a question. So if either one of you have a question to ask, now's the time.
Yeah, Adam, I hear you talking a lot about policy, but I also hear you talking about like really diversifying curriculum at the same time. What are the biggest gifts you feel like we can give our students when it comes to equity work at this point?
I think I make it very clear with my students how the current educational system tries to keep them down. So I think we need to be aware of the way that the system works to oppress us. And we need to be aware of the way that there are very logical and predictable consequences because of that. And then on the other hand, we need to be aware of the immense joy and resilience that despite all of this, this is what our students and our young people can do. So I think giving them both sides of that coin and that knowledge is our best path forward. So Steve, for you, like, coming from a counselor end, I'm curious as to see what like mental health looks like in schools, especially when we think about the stigmas that come along with Black and Brown communities and mental health.
Yeah, I think in addition, like when we talk about like mental health in communities, like the biggest piece that we have, which I think we need to avoid when it comes to stigma reduction, is talking about diagnosing or forcing or trying to control someone's health or mental health, and not engaging in an authentic relationship with them first, not asking them like what their experience was, what their concerns are, and talk about common sense and practical ways to do that. I strongly believe in the gift of therapy as being one of those tools, but more strongly, I believe that all of my students have tremendous capability and their parents are doing their best job to support them and provide the best opportunities for them. If we can use my experience working with other families and their expertise with themselves, we can create real opportunity for them. So the big part about stigma reduction is first coming into an equal partnership and being willing to give up that control. And then from there, I think we can do a lot of interesting things. So like there's a big conversation right now as far as like universal mental health screeners, because we understand universal mental health screeners can be a very powerful tool. It can create real conversations earlier on to help to plug people into high quality care if there's high quality care available. And so these are going to be some deliberate conversations on whether we sign all of our students in or wait for a student to have access to their mom or dad who might work evenings or nights to sign the permission slip, or what, and those ongoing conversations. So I think really at the end though, to help to guide those conversations, we need to be asking those hard questions again. Who are the children who are accessing care? What does that look like on the other side of that? What have we been doing on the front end to provide care for them? And what does the quality of that care look like? And if that is being shown to be different by, say, race or gender or locality in your school district, we need to ask why. Those can be some difficult questions, but again, it's all to this one precious, precious treasure that we're all focusing on, and that's our students.
I'm gonna wrap this up soon, but I really want to know. I know you want to stay, don't you? But I really want to know when we're talking about the future. There's so many things that are out there right now. What do you want? And I'm gonna say two things. Maybe if you have one or two key things to say, what do you want for the future of education?
I could answer that in a few different ways. Like, we understand, like right now, like education absolutely has our main things in our country at a crucible moment. Like the easy part is our education system has become far too predictive for the outcome of our students based off of race alone. And that gives me a lot of pause and concern. And when we talk about that, like the easiest answer is I want our students' opportunities to be unpredictable and to be boundless. And to understand what that looks like, it's a lot of intentional work. It means that we're going to have teachers who, instead of saying, "What are you doing?" are asking you, like, "What can I do to help?" And I think we're hearing more of those conversations. I think it is, and I got to shout out to you, Adam. Like when you're talking about like having those frank conversations with our students, I think it is recognizing that this isn't a magic trick, that there are actually systems here that are at play, and giving our students the language and tools to navigate that system as well, so they can be more effective in the real world. Because the reality is, our students are leaving a segregated school system and going into a segregated workforce. And then in addition to that, making sure that we can create those endless opportunities for students to all of our good. And again, not being at the expense of individuals investing in high quality organizations like the YWCA of Lancaster, but in other opportunities as well that we're just provide to them. So yeah, shout out to all of that.
Thinking about two things. The first thing I would want as a federal government is I would want a education industrial complex rather than the military industry complex that we have. So thinking about policy and the pressure that I personally want to put on this new administration is that we need more funding for all kinds of educational initiatives. From a more higher level, second thing that I want all my students to know that they are capable of doing anything that they want. I also want them to know that it's okay to not be exceptional, because I think about my Black and brown students and they all feel like they have to be doctors. They all have to be Obama. And that's another thing that white supremacy does. It only gives credit to what we would call like the exceptional Negro, if we're thinking about those tropes. So I want my students to know that whoever they are, that is okay.
Thank you both. I want to say that Steve did put in Hosey for 2024.
I wasn't born in this country.
Where were you born?
Korea.
We should talk later, cousin.
All right. Well, this has been wonderful. I think that more than 20 gems were dropped tonight. And this is on YouTube platform. It'll stay up on YouTube, on YWCA Lancaster's platform. It is also on streaming to Facebook Live right now. And this video will be saved. So it will be on YWCA Lancaster's Facebook page. I'm going to figure out a way to continue to push out this conversation. So I appreciate the both of you for being here this evening, rendering your expertise, and just enlightening myself, even as not only someone who considers themselves an educator, but also as a parent. Right now, brief update, we have received 280 donors, and that is a total amount of $35,779 raised for YWCA Lancaster. So I appreciate you. It does not only go to the Center for Racial and Gender Equity, it also goes to our Why Wonderful Kids program, our sexual assault program, and our parent empowerment program. So thank you so much for your diligence and raising funds for YWCA Lancaster.
Shout out to Jasmine. So this is our last hour of our day, but Jasmine has been live streaming since midnight. So
can't stop, won't stop.
Right. So as the new director of the Center in Racial and Gender Equity, big props to you. So yeah, you're wonderful. It's so great to work with you.
Thank you.
Anti-oppression work is a marathon.
It is. It is. And we didn't even get to talk about self-care. That's another conversation, but we will one day.
I'm watching The Mandalorian going to sleep. That's my self-care tonight.
Hey, Pot, I'm Kettle.
All right, everybody have a great evening. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate you both.
See ya.
See ya.
Do I leave? I'm gonna leave. Do I stay? I smile. I'm gonna keep on smiling.